to me, as long as the quality of life is there, I love life, and I think it's a priceless experience. I'm thankful for every day I get, but I do want more, and I'm not embarrassed to do whatever it takes. We can change the outcomes that are coming down the road. We can make a difference for almost everybody we see. We can certainly improve the quality of their health. And I believe in so doing, we will extend their lifespans meaningfully.
Modern science has finally tied together the way in which getting leaner and improving longevity and how supplements might make getting to both easier.
With me now with some answers is
a real doctor who treats real patients and has developed several all-natural remedies to fight the effects of aging, enhance your memory, and even give a much-needed boost to your energy levels. With us to tell us about these cutting-edge formulas is Dr. Dave himself.
Dr. Dave Wojnarowski.
Dr. Dave Wojnarowski, also known as Dr. Dave.
Thank you.
Dr. Dave Unleashed.
Disclaimer, we have to be very, very careful about what we say. You alone, the listener, must assume all liability and responsibility for use, misuse, or disuse of this information, non-use of this information. None of the information here is for anything but entertainment and educational purposes. It is not meant to treat, mitigate, diagnose, or in any way affect any disease.
Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Dave Wojnarowski from www.thelongevityedge, TheLongevityEdge.com, with another amazing podcast. And today's guest is a phenomenal addition to our knowledge base. This is Dr. Liza Petre that I have on the other end of the line today, and she's going to enlighten us with some help on how she stays amazingly trim, fit, and her take on diet. She is a board certified cardiologist. She is also a bariatric physician, runs several clinics in New York City, and is an amazing entrepreneur and an extremely bright woman. And they always say, also an extremely beautiful woman. And they always say that great minds think alike. And so I met Dr. Petre when I was doing the telomere circuit, so to speak, which I still do from time to time. And then each of us sort of dabbled and dove into the keto. And Liza came out of it as a bariatric physician. I came out of it typical internet entrepreneur. So at any rate, the information you're going to get today is stuff you can't get anywhere else. It's going to be, I've asked Liza to go a little personal with me today and tell me what she does. So I'm going to ask her to tell you a little bit about herself, anything that I left out. And then I'll launch into some questions that I've specially prepared for Liza, and we'll take it from there and see what comes out. This is always fun to talk to you, Liza. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, Dave, great to chat with you. We go way back. We started actually 8 years ago with the telomere project. We were both fascinated by that. And
Still am.
A few years later, we started the keto movement. We jumped on it, and we were both again fascinated how that can actually improve your metabolism and how we understand better the functioning of our metabolism and energy and brain function. And years later, I've been fascinated for the last 3 years with intermittent fasting, which is another step forward in understanding our biology. So definitely intermittent fasting is for me as fascinating as keto, because I do think they complement, they feed into each other, right? Intermittent fasting, it's the way I see it is just basically training your body for endurance towards stress, because you switch your metabolism back and forth between it's more like inducing ketosis faster, but when you eat you still have some small amount of carbs, so it's not such an intense ketosis versus when you fast for a long period of time. And I think it's really beneficial to be able to switch back and forth metabolism from burning just on fat and sometimes having a little bit of carbohydrates metabolism.
I agree 100%. And actually, the book I was showing you that's about to be released, The Keto Edge, it talks about that. And, the little dirty secret to share with you is when people come to me and say, I can't do keto, or I don't want to do keto, or I don't believe in keto, I tell them to intermittent fast because I think that you can get a lot of what keto gives you out of fasting, out of intermittent fasting. And, you know, essentially what we're trying to do metabolically is take out the trash. And you mentioned stress. And so this kind of, there's so much, you know, cohesion in this thought about stress. And goes way back to Hans Selye, the German physiologist, who basically said your body can pretty much adapt to anything if you give it in small doses. And, you know, intermittent fasting is sort of the small dose way of getting your body to adapt to the absence of food and changing your metabolism and cleaning out your mitochondria and your cellular junk. And this is how we lived when our genes and epigenes were designed, you know, 50,000 to 2 million years ago. This is the way everything we have genetically, nutritionally now comes from that time when we were fasting of needs because there wasn't food around all the time. And, you know, the keto thing, if you caught a deer and ate it and it was fat and protein, it was a lot more nutrition than eating a bunch of berries. So our ancestors did exactly that. We still have the genetics and much of the epigenetics for that. So I couldn't agree with you more. And for those who do not want to do keto, intermittent fasting is a great way to go. So tell me about your versions of intermittent fasting. How long, how much, and what's your window for eating, that kind of thing.
There are three main options to do intermittent fasting. One, if you do it on a daily basis, the 8 to 16 method. And if you are more adventurous, you can go to 6 to 18, more aggressive, just have a 6 hour of eating in a daily period. It's much easier to do the fasting in a nighttime. Also, you can fast 2 days a week, which is cutting 25% of calories to non-consecutive days. Or also you can do alternate day fasting when one day you eat normally and one you cut in half. However, either way you do it, the most sustainable, I still think it's the daily method. And as you said, you're right, we haven't evolved much genetically from thousands of years ago. However, our diets have been hijacked with the agricultural revolution and all the grains and everything else, but we remain pretty much the same genetically. So returning to that and understanding that, yes, fasting is like a detox phase, exactly what you said. The cells can clean, the brain cells can clean as well. Mm-hmm. And it's important to allow ourselves this time of recovery. And also, it speeds up your metabolism, you know that. And yep. Second, has anti-aging benefits. People live longer. That has been shown in animal models. And also, it's protecting brain function. It allows, it's actually used as a method for all this, they are considered no metabolic diseases. Alzheimer and Parkinson are considered metabolic diseases, and they implement intermittent fasting to help the brain clear all these proteins accumulated.
Yeah, well,
and
actually,
there are also other benefits. I mean, it's anti-cancer, we know that, and improves your growth hormone production at night and all this.
Yeah, so many ways to skin a cat. Intermittent fasting is one of them, and you know, ketosis, longer-term ketosis is another. Now, it's interesting that you bring up fasting, and I would just clarify something that we talked about earlier. You know, I've been keto pretty much, I'd say about 80% of the time since 2012. But I'm what's called calorie restricted keto because of the intermittent fasting, and I only eat twice a day. I do not eat ad libitum. So a lot of people who are out there on keto are eating ad libitum, large amounts of fat, and I'm not necessarily against that, but it took me too long to get into ketosis. So what I wound up doing, ironically, was calorie restricted keto. And if you read Dr. Seyfried's book on cancer as a metabolic disease, this is exactly what's protective against neoplastic diseases and metastases in particular. So Tom has treated or has been involved in the treatment of several grade 4 glios that have lived years, not months, which is what they're told now, but years. And the tumors have shrunk. They haven't disappeared, but they've become chronic illnesses that people can live with rather than a death sentence. And you think about the current therapies for these, calorie nutrition, usually with some type of carbohydrates, also corticosteroids, which imbalance blood sugar, all kinds of things that, when you look at the metabolic aspect, are not necessarily healthy. But so I do it. I do exactly what you do. I do 18-6, and then I just wind up because fat is satiating and increases the leptin on full hormone. Excuse me, the ghrelin, and you eat less. You just eat less. And it is an evolutionarily correct diet, I think. I'm not going to argue if people want to do other types of diets. Diet is like religion. I never get into an argument about it anymore because it's just people get very offended, when you start telling them that their diet probably isn't the best. But absolutely, those things. And you said about stress. Stress in small doses is what's called hormetic, and hormetic has a whole series of gene transcriptions and epigenetics and hormones, all of which you mentioned, the sex hormones, the growth hormone, and it also shifts the epigenetics to anti-inflammatory. And as you know, as you're as well versed in anti-aging medicine as anybody, the older we get under natural, and that means our current situations, which I don't think are natural, but the more of this inflammatory epigenome we transcribe, and so we get more inflamed as we get older, and you start this vicious cycle, and then you get telomere shortening and senescence, which is inflammatory as well. And then if you have a high carbohydrate diet, and let's face it, Americans are eating 300, 500, 600 grams of carbohydrate a day.
Correct.
Insulin secretion off the wall. Insulin is a pro-inflammatory growth hormone, so it can be actually, I think, neoplastic. If you look at diabetics and people who have prediabetes, their incidence of cancer is higher. And again, this is a transcription that insulin causes of all these inflammatory chemicals. So fixing this with calorie restriction and or ketosis or both is one way. And then eventually we'll get into mTOR. My audience knows about mTOR, so if you want to talk about that, we can. But I'm very curious. You're a bariatric physician now. Tell me some of the more difficult things, because I used to do a lot of weight loss in my practice. What have been the challenges for you and your patients? In other words, if you could give me the top 3 things that actually prevent patients from being successful, what would you say they are?
Absolutely. Number one is the sugar is addictive. It's more addictive than cocaine. And it triggers a pleasure reaction. Yes, dopamine. Mm-hmm. So this is the biggest challenge because, first of all, we live in a society where everything revolves around meal. It comes to parties, it comes to being social, family, everything revolves around the meal. 200 years ago, our parents would go to dance, to go for a walk, for a hike. Their workout outdoors, their gardens. That was not everything revolving around meal. So I think challenge number one I have is breaking the addiction people have. And even once you enter ketosis and do intermittent fasting, your body has less sugar cravings. However, the psychological addiction is huge, and the temptation, that's number one. So this is more of a behavioral modification that we have to work with our patients. Number two is also comes back to the emotional aspect, because we as children, we learned when we are crying, our mother gave us a bottle of milk and food to calm down. So this is very ingrained into our behavior, that food calms us down. So it's another psychological angle of food and the relationship we have with food, right? So these are really the main challenges. I think everybody knows in a frame more or less what they should eat, but implementing it and creating the discipline around it's the most challenging that I see in our practice. In that regard, I find men much easier than women. The same we know when they try to quit smoking, men are more successful than women, just because men, when they set their minds to do something, they're able to stick to a program more than women do.
We do tend to be goal-oriented. That's the yang energy. But we are living in a time of the rise of the divine feminine. So all of us, whether our energies are yin or yang, can probably benefit from a little bit of the other side of things. But I'll share with you mine from my experiences. One of the things was there was a belief in my patients that diets worked, but not for them. And it stemmed from the lack of instant gratification. In other words, I went on a diet for a week and I only lost 1 pound. Now these are back in the days when we didn't really push ketosis. This is a 2000, 2002, 3, 4. I was a busy internist, and the diets were carbohydrate rich, which of course now we look at them and say, oh my God, no wonder people didn't lose weight. But some of the people eventually did with just calorie restriction were able to lose. But it took that development of the key word you said, which was discipline around the eating habits. And my thing to them was, I used to say, when you're confronted with a choice of eating something, say to yourself, not I can't have that, but I don't eat that anymore. And this is what I do for myself. Like if some piece of cake in front of me and I'm on keto, I don't know, I can't have that. No, I don't eat that anymore. And that's my choice. I'm choosing not to eat it. And this is the sort of empowerment that I try to put my patients into. So one was belief. Diets work, but not for me. The second was, again, discipline. There's a certain time, and even in keto, it takes 3 or 4 days. The first 3 or 4 days of induction of ketosis can be very difficult for people. It can be lots of cravings, lots of psychological stuff comes out. You're detoxing your body and all these emotions come out, people crying, people getting upset. I mean, this is the rare case, but it does happen. And this happens with spiritual detoxes, emotional detoxes, and of course, physical detoxes. So getting them through that first couple of days to where they experience, hey, I'm not hungry anymore. And then you get a magical epiphany, which is eating is a habit. These 3 squares of meals a day were actually, this originated in Austria during the industrial age in the 1850s. The Kaiser decided that this is the way to make his workers more productive, 3 square meals a day. There's no nutritional paradigm for that whatsoever. And yet our nutritionists, our traditionally trained nutritionists, have adopted this type of thing and said 3 square meals a day and you can't miss breakfast.
And 2 snacks.
Yeah. Exactly, and I haven't had breakfast in probably what people would call breakfast in, I don't know, 3 years. It's not killing me, and I'm not unproductive. So that was a big thing. And then finally, and this is one I suffered through myself, and that is, once you get that eating is a habit, I started missing the texture of things like toast and crackers. And the way I got around that was I found some very low carbohydrate crackers because I'm wickedly carbohydrate addictive. If somebody gives me like one of these low net carbohydrate bars that's 3 grams net, bull crap. I eat it and 30 minutes later I'm looking for the sticky buns. That's not they're not being accurate in how they describe their food. But certain things like the Wasserbrot or one out there is called Le Pain de Fleur, which is made from nuts, nut crackers, cauliflower crackers, and also the cheese, where they make the sheets of cheese that are crackers and great high fat source. So that's how I got over that, missing that texture. Anyway, those were my big ones that I had to deal with, you see this every day in your practice. You have how many bariatric clinics? 2 or 3 now?
I have 5 clinics, and we see 600 to 800 patients monthly in each. But yes, adding exactly to what you said, we became grazers for wrong reasons because we don't eat as much food. We actually, with this snacking every few hours advice, we basically became eating more and being more dependent on food than we need to be. So definitely grazing is another challenge to overcome. But, going back to where we started, to that point that ketosis and intermittent fasting, actually they're like complementary. First of all, one is not a diet. Ketosis is more what you eat, but intermittent fasting is a timed pattern of eating, so they go together very well.
They do. I mean, I do them default and de facto, just exactly what you said, 18-6. At first meal is bigger, second meal I'm not hungry, so it's smaller. Sometimes I forget it and I only eat 1 meal a day. And when you first met me, I was probably around 210. Right now I'm probably about 185, and that's a really good ideal weight for me because it's mostly body fat. I've been able to keep my lean muscle mass because I work out pretty hard. I want to talk to you about what you do soon. When I walk out in the public now, I feel like I'm a different species. I feel like I'm a child because I'm half the size of men and women, my age or younger. But, I never had a 6-pack till I went keto, never. I didn't ever think I could. I just didn't believe it was possible. And all of a sudden, this youthful, lean body popped out of nowhere, which wasn't the reason I went on it. I went on it because I wanted to see if it would be viable for cancer patients. That's a whole nother story. I detail that in my book. But the side effect was that, it leans you out, gets rid of body fat, and what musculature you do have becomes very, very apparent. So it's not a bad thing aesthetically to do these intermittent fastings and ketos. You have mentioned your product, bone broth. I tried it as soon as I saw it. I saw your picture on the side of it, so I knew I had to have it. I love it. It is very filling. It works perfectly with my keto diet. Sometimes I'll use other high protein soups and I'll just mix two of them. So I have maybe a 250, 300 calorie meal. And that's all I need for, 15, 16 hours. Tastes great. And the nutritional content is excellent. Tell us a little bit about that, how you decided to get involved with that, and, how do people get your stuff? I know I got it on Amazon, but, your site, my site, we're going to be carrying your stuff, as you know. So.
Definitely, it's one of those situations where you create things out of need. So I was, operating and running my weight loss clinics, and always I was thinking of different products that I could create a healthier source of proteins. Right now, all the products available are based on wheat protein, and a lot of people are not tolerant to wheat product. They get bloated, plus a lot of them, they have artificial sweeteners. So we wanted something that could be clean protein, a great amino acid profile. And then one of your children, our grandma, used to take the animal bones, the pork, the cow, and make the soup and make that gelatin that we're eating. And just going back to that, I said, I want to recreate the same taste that my grandmother used to cook with a little touch of garlic, a little pepper, and flavor. Delicious. And here comes bone broth. The movement just started a few years ago when I said, that's it. That's what I was looking for. The same when intermittent fasting and ketosis came around, you have a sense for it and said, that's the way to go. That's where the future is. So it's a great source of protein. We use a grass-fed animal product, and we created our own custom flavors. We work with flavoring companies. They are green listed, whole food approved. They have no GMO, no soy, no artificial ingredients. And we wanted to make it convenient. So we really focused on having individual sachets so you can do it on the go. It's 60 calories a package and has 10 grams of protein. And basically dissolves instantly with hot water, and you have a delicious soup on the go.
Yeah, it's extremely convenient. Couple things I'd point about using it just as a user giving you feedback. The convenience factor is huge for me because I do love food and I cook and I do all that, but cooking for me is like a vacation, a hobby. So most times I'm eating because I know I should and I have to, and sometimes I forget to eat. So I eat to live. Generally, I don't live to eat. And for someone who's busy and needs a convenient source of satiating protein that tastes good, has the nutrition that you need, and especially while you're dieting, it's low calorie, but you still have excellent nutrition. People need to understand adequate calories, calorie restriction, but not nutrition restriction. Your nutrition is still perfect for maintaining and even building body if you do ultimately start working out. So there's a lot of benefits to this. Convenience wise, I actually add usually a tablespoon or so of oil, sometimes a teaspoon of black sesame or a tablespoon of olive, just because I like to keep the fat content up. But I've used it on the road. It's very easy to mix. And you have a red label and a green label. Tell us a little bit about those. What's the difference?
Well, the red label is based on bone broth as a protein source. Also, if you're aware, bone broth comes with collagen, which is also a type of amino acids paired together. There are 3 of them. So the collagen also, it's good for your skin, anti-aging, and benefiting your joints as well. But we had quite a few people who are vegan. So then we decided to find a similar products for those who don't eat animal products. And we came across pea protein, and it's fascinating because we know that vegan diets don't have the same amount of protein. I would say if you want to match 1-to-1 per 100 grams of meat product versus a vegetarian product, the ratio is 1-to-6. So the amount of proteins you have from animal products, it's basically you have to eat 6 times more from vegetables. So, but we came across pea protein, and it's interesting because it's closest to animal protein. It's 80% close in amino acid profile, and it's the only complete plant protein. So it's interesting because it comes like a very viable alternative for those who avoid the animal product. Also, the way it is processed, it doesn't create bloating. They remove that protein that triggers a little bit of indigestion. So bloating is out of the picture. Also, the carbs are removed because if you eat beans, we know they are very carb loaded. But the pea protein, as it comes as an extract, doesn't have the carbohydrate. So it's basically the mirror image, not as superior as bone broth, but it's next online for those who are looking for a plant alternative, or as a variety in the daytime. If you don't want to drink 3 bone broths a day, you could use 1 and 1.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the taste, and it's interesting that you talk about that because you got to love those legumes for protein profile. It's a great choice. There is a thing called vegan keto and vegetarian keto, and I've been on both of those. Didn't tell you when we were catching up. I'm now a certified yoga instructor, if you can believe that. Somebody who couldn't touch his toes a year ago. So anyway, I'm learning. But at any rate, during those boot camps and during those yoga retreats, I requested and was granted the ability to, if I brought the cookbooks and I showed them how to cook, the kitchen staff of these beautiful places in Costa Rica, Rio Charipo and Finca Mia, would make vegetarian or vegan keto entries, and everybody loved them, including the vegans and vegetarians, because they weren't going to change their diets. And it's traditional in yoga retreats and places like this and boot camps. You go vegan, you avoid eating animals for the religious reasons that are associated with yoga. So it fit perfectly, and there's quite a few delicious things you can make. So for those of you who are vegan and vegetarian out there, or as Lisa said, just want that change of pace, it's in there and you can get it. I really enjoy your product. I know you obviously, and I'd be happy to support anything you do, but when you have something this good, I can't not do it. So thank you for giving the opportunity to bring out this to my audience and get them to understand, So I make Ketogen, the beta hydroxybutyrate. I have a cookbook coming out called the Keto Edge. And your information is adding to the knowledge base for my folks. And I'm going to ask you I think as we anticipated, we're not having any trouble talking. But there's a couple things I definitely want to cover. First, I want to talk a little bit about the anti-aging aspects of this, because that's always what I'm about, at the center, the core of everything that I do, whether it's keto, cookbooks, whatever it is, the type of physical fitness that I'm chasing after right now. All these things are, in my opinion, anti-aging. So you mentioned it, we talked about it. Obviously, anything that keeps you alive longer is anti-aging. So if you don't die of cancer or heart disease, I want to real quick tell you, when I was 2 years into keto, the last test I did. And you tell me this as a cardiologist, the last test I did was the NMR of the lipids and cholesterol profile. And I was kind of scared because I was eating 70% fat, maybe 20-25% protein and almost no carbs. And there's a lot of fat, cream cheese and bacon and oh boy, I needed to know. So I went and I did the NMR. And ironically, one of my physician, who I almost never see, is one of my students, who's one of my residents. So when he took over my practice, I decided I would go see him. And I came in with a cholesterol of 201. And my father had heart disease later in his life, and my doctor wanted to put me on statin. And I said, would you look at the profile, please? So my LDL was 70. It was all light fluffy. My HDL was 101. It was all light fluffy. My triglycerides were 50. The bulk of the cholesterol was HDL cholesterol. And he wanted to put me on a statin. So just for those of you out there who are afraid of eating fat because you think you're still living under the myth that fats, saturated fats, even saturated fats, are not necessarily associated with elevated cholesterol levels. But when you add carbohydrates to the fat content, you have an issue. Your take on all that? What do you think? What have you seen?
Definitely. By the way, congrats for your HDL. Sounds like fabulous numbers. You've been doing a great job there.
Yeah.
You're right. A few years ago, actually, we totally changed the dietary guidelines when even the head of the American College of Cardiology stepped up and said, we're so wrong about eggs. We're wrong about meat. It's in all reality, 80% of cholesterol that we make in our body comes from our liver. So it's like it's only 20% is influenced by our diet. So I think we overemphasized in the past our diets when at the end it's whatever your genes are, whatever your liver makes when it comes to cholesterol. So I'm not saying there are a small fraction of people where diets do tip the balance toward more cholesterol. So because those have worse genes than the others. But for those people, regular people, we actually kind of took the meat and the fats out of the jail, so to speak, right? We don't say anymore you cannot eat eggs. In moderation, you can have red meat and eggs and saturated fat. However, the recommendations are still that you should stay in less than 10%. But if you really put those numbers in the kitchen, you have plenty of room.
Yeah, the other thing I would suggest, and again, you're far more versed on up to date on the literature for diets and cardiology than I am, but I haven't seen a whole lot of information on hardcore keto diets long term in metabolic profiles or on heart disease risk. I'm not sure that there's anything out there that would say yes or no there. And the reason I say that is my numbers before all this was running about 250 total cholesterol, HDL about 45, LDL about 180, 190. My triglycerides are always low because of the fish oil. But that was a sort of typical quote unquote healthy diet with lots of carbohydrates and cream of wheat and oatmeal and fruits. So for me personally, I found that by removing carbohydrates, it actually changed my metabolic profile completely. And again, if you superimpose this on fasting, the whole saturated fat story, if you look at tribes and they still are out there, some of the Inuit and some of the other tribes that hunt for their food, they carry saturated fat in their sachets and pouches because it's their sole source, high calorie source. This is like pemmican is an example. And if you don't add a lot of fruit to pemmican, it's basically bacon fat or meat fat. And they're out there for 2 weeks hunting, so they're physically active. They're actually intermittently fasting, and they're getting their calorie source from saturated fat because the unsaturated fats, as you know, will go rancid. Polyunsaturated. As a fish oil guy, I know this. I have to coat my fish oil in airtight gel caps and do the KOH testing and peroxidase levels and all that other stuff for shelf life. Very, very scrupulously looking at what's happening to these polyunsaturated fats. But it's good to hear that and I saw that the American College of Cardiology has changed their tune.
Relaxed again.
Yeah. And that's wonderful.
But Dave, how it started, if you look historically, all this low-fat movement was wrong. It started in 1940s in Europe, and then somehow they had some studies of association with heart disease and high cholesterol, high-fat diet, but they're not founded. They removed countries like France, who were eating cheese and drinking wine all the time. So those countries are not included. So their data was very biased when you look at now in retrospect. And in the 70s, this movement came with low fat. And because if you remove the fat, food has no taste. It's like cardboard. Then it got replaced with carbohydrates. And here we have, in the last 50 years, we have an obesity epidemic. we have more diabetes, we see disease in children that we haven't seen before. And finally, we realized we made a huge mistake in 70s and 80s to promote carbohydrates. Now we're going in reversal mode, and we definitely, there are a lot of trials out there that show that improved metabolic profile of keto diet. But also what's interesting, if you do compare two weight loss programs side by side, one is low fat, one it's low carbohydrates, even people lose the same amount of weight, although they might lose a little bit more on the keto, they lose more visceral fat with keto diets. So that means it has a better, less inflammation in the body, and it has a better way of you process the fat, and you burn the bad fat, because visceral fat is bad fat, is very pro-inflammatory. And keto is much better with that. Also, of course, we know you improve your insulin resistance, and it's like opening the gates for using that storage. When you are on a high carb diet, the gates are locked because insulin is pushing the fat into the storage, period. And when you reverse that process, you are much flexible to outsource that fat as a source of energy.
We talked about detoxing. Fat is a great place to store things like xenohormones and other toxins in your system that you come across. And that's a whole other topic we could get into, but there's plenty of toxins that we eat, plenty of toxins that we breathe, and plenty of toxins that we put on our skin, which is why when I showed you the essential oils, these are all purely organic, essential oils. But at any rate, the detoxification process is multiple levels. It works through fat removal. It works at a metabolic level. And very briefly, your take on the anti-aging aspects of the keto diet.
Absolutely. There are many studies that show, and mostly in animals, and we know from Japanese, the Okinawa diet, they have the highest longevity on Earth. We know that they eat high fat, high protein diets, and that's what it explains. So it's similar keto in a way to what we do. But definitely we know that people who cut their caloric intake to 80% or less live longer. So that's not a question anymore.
On a cellular level, I'm going to just talk a little bit because my audience knows this. They've been reading my stuff forever, but there's a very famous, it's now famous hormone, or I should say complex of enzymes. It's a complex called mTOR, which stands for the mammalian target of rapamycin. And this was identified as the longevity thing. It's probably much more of a metabolic gate guardian than it is a true longevity thing. There are probably other things that happen. But what happens when you inhibit this? Well, first of all, what happens when you turn it up? And you turn it up through things like excess growth hormone, you turn it up with excess insulin. And what it does is it essentially accelerates fat storage, inflammation, the way you said. And of course, we mentioned about inflammation being something that we combat because there's this concept of inflammatory aging. So the less of this sort of slow cyclic inflammation that we have as we age, the more likely we are to age gracefully, live longer, and have a healthy diet. And that's all tied to this hormone of mTOR. And insulin is part of that complex as well. And one of the other things that happens is you get recycling. So the cell itself, and we're made of trillions of these things, has within it the ability to repair to a certain extent some of the machinery that's inside of it. And it also has the ability to recycle things. So when you talk about amino acids and amino acid profile of your bone broth, there's 21 amino acids and there's 9 essential ones. So the 9 essential ones you have to get through your diet. It's a lot like fish oil. You have two major, you do have two major essential fatty acids, linolenic and linoleic, but I say EPA and DHA just because that's what your body converts them to. And these things cannot be gotten through the diet. But the cell can conserve everything else. And it can even conserve the mitochondrial machinery, the powerhouses in the cell. It can recycle those. It can use the enzymes, and it can use the protein structures out of those. It can recycle a lot of the other material that comes out of the what's called the endoplasmic reticulum. And if the cell itself dies and it can't recycle them, the rest of the immune system charges in and recycles these things. And the very last is food. If it can't use it for anything else, it turns it into calories. So this recycling, especially the mitochondria, getting rid of sick, dead, and dying mitochondria, and it's called mitophagy. And there's a proliferation of healthy new mitochondria that happens when you go keto or you intermittent fast. And in the process, also, there's what's called liposomal excretion of things like lipofuscin granules and all kinds of other things. So this is the taking out the trash part of things. And this is all due to diet. And, we didn't know this when you and I were in med school. We didn't know any of that. So this is semi-cutting edge stuff. And when you look at longevity, I can tell you, when people tell me, okay, doc, one sentence, tell me what I need to do to live a longer, healthier life. I say, reduce your calories and manage your insulin levels. And that's it.
I would add exercise and sleep.
Well, I would love to see them all do that.
Yeah.
I do talk about that, but I mean, when I'm given that one
three pillars of health.
Yeah.
Food, nutrition, exercise, and sleep.
Seven of them. But yeah, and sleep, of course, is radical, and of course your nutrition, but and exercise and meditation and quite a few others we talk about in the lovely book, the Immortality Edge, way back in 2010. But this is the anti-aging aspects of the keto diet are just beginning to come out. But what we talked about today, changing the epigenetic expression, reversing the inflammatory epigenome, improving insulin, taking out the trash, recycling cells, preserving telomere length. All this, I guarantee you, if anybody bothers to look, they'll see it in a keto diet. So it may not be the only way. There may be other diets that do this. And thank you also for pointing out the whole bias thing of medical literature, because whenever I see the word meta-analysis, I'm always skeptical, because garbage in, garbage out. You can pick any set of studies you want, and you can come out, feed it a bunch of negative studies and get a negative result. So I still like to see good old-fashioned, hardcore, expensive clinical research. Not as popular as it used to be, but I'm not a big fan of meta-analysis unless the data is representative of everything that's going on out there. So I have as a personal part, I promised folks, our world-class, world-famous cardiologist, bariatric physician that we have on today, who is incredibly fit. And I don't even know how old you are, Lisa, but you still look to me like you're in your early 30s. So
you're right there. Let's leave it there. So we'll keep it there.
Yeah, exactly. Good place to stay, right? Yeah. But I'd like to, if you would share, what might be a typical day eating-wise, and then fitness-wise. What do you like to do fitness-wise? Because you've always been very pragmatic about both your eating and your fitness. You're not crazy like me and go out and run ultra marathons and do that kind of crazy stuff. But you have a very pragmatic approach, and it's clearly served you well. Yes.
Yeah, I do believe in balance. So I'm like you. I stopped having breakfast a while back. I do believe more in brunch. I think breakfast is overrated. So I moved the concept to brunch, which I start around 11 o'clock. I have a coffee in the morning. I have my bone broth around 10, 11. Mm-hmm. And I do like to exercise also. If I do some cardio, I like to do it on fasting. I think it's more efficient. It's increasing your growth hormone more. There are more benefits to that. Then as I go with my day, I make sure I believe in a new movement. I mean, yes, it's keto, but I like, as you said, fiber keto. I believe in fibers, in greens. So I try to load as much as I can with fibers throughout the day and finish eating around 6-7 p.m. And that's pretty much it. For exercise, when it comes to there are two types. You have the cardio and you have resistance training. For me, resistance trainings, I like short, intense bursts of exercise, like I do half an hour, more like high interval training, like you exercise for 1 minute intense and then you take a break for 30 seconds. So I'm sure you stick to a similar regimen. We spoke many times in the past.
Sure. Mm. Well, I think I want to point something out is a lot of people have the impression that when you go keto and you eat all this fat, you can't eat green vegetables or vegetables, and that's absolutely not true. I mean, vegetables have very low fat, and I was never a big fan of excessive vegetarian or vegan diets because the omega-3, omega-6 ratios are screwed up. But you can eat vegetables. The amount of fat in vegetables is small, but the amount of carbs in vegetables is usually even smaller. So, I mean, you could pretty much add libitum on the vegetables and fiber without affecting negatively your ketosis at all. And they are very, very filling, which is wonderful. Any other tips for folks who are anything that you struggled with when you did this, you personally? I told you about I had to have a cracker.
Well, I have many challenges. We share that, but I guess it's part of being normal sometimes. As you said, you shared honestly, you're in keto 80% of the time.
Correct.
And I would put myself down if I was less than 90%. But I think it's normal. And actually, this is another concept we can bring into discussion next time. If for some folks who can't do keto 100%, and as a matter of fact, neither of us can do that, if there is some role for keto, non-keto cycling, like a little bit, not really carb cycling, but just having days when you don't have to be in keto.
Yeah, I go low carb when I don't, keto under 50 grams, low carb under 100 grams, and again 80% of the time it's keto. So,
right.
But I tend to do it more, where I'll be keto for months at a time, and then I'll just miss a cracker or something, or it's Christmas and somebody gives me a cookie, and then the floodgates are open. So.
But you can have carbs from fruits and vegetables, so you don't necessarily have to resort to candies or ice cream. You still can have, fruits that have a little bit more carbohydrates, like, apples, grapes, things like that.
And a lot of berries still.
Yeah, they have less than 15 grams per portion.
It's manageable.
It's manageable.
Yeah. So, and that's a very good point. It really comes down to food choices. And as I said, I'm wickedly carbohydrate or sugar addicted. It comes from my growing up. When I was a little boy, my mom was afraid I wasn't eating enough, and Kellogg's used to make this cereal called Concentrated. It came in a box that was half the size of a regular cereal, and I used to eat like half a box of it and then put 2 tablespoons of sugar on top of it. And I swear that's where I got addicted. And my mom used to say, good boy. And of course I was a chubby little kid, and a year or two later. But these sort of original patterns that are ingrained in our childlike behaviors, from our parents, are something we struggle with. But it's food choice, and then just less and less discipline. The longer you make this a lifestyle, the less discipline you need, and the more fun and easy it gets, and the more benefits you start seeing, both in your metabolic numbers and your physique and how you feel. So this has been enlightening, and it's been an absolute blast. Thank you and appreciation for everything you are, who you are. And if you want to see a gorgeous woman and an amazingly brilliant woman, go visit Lisa on any one of her sites. How about your websites, Lisa? Would you tell us what they are?
Sure. The bone broth one, it's called brothbydesign.com.
Mm-hmm.
So BROTH bydesign.com. And my website, it's Luisa, LuizaPetremd.com.
Okay, and just for everyone, I'll also be selling this on The Longevity Edge, TheLongevityEdge.com. I'll be selling Lisa's products, and Lisa will be sending them to you, so you'll be able to benefit from this amazing thing that was created out of a combination of brilliance and necessity. Thank you for the creation. You've always been a creative person just like me, and I love it. And thank you for the information. Let's do this again soon, shall we?
Oh, I could talk to you for hours. It's always lovely to catch up.
Always a pleasure. So
take care. Thanks a lot.